The command deck was unraveling. Power failures, silent terminals, a vault sealed behind 2 feet of steel and 1 line of red text manual override only. They tried every protocol, every clearance, every name on the manifest. But deep beneath the server floor, past the crawl space, nobody logged anymore. A woman rolled up her sleeves. No rank, no radio. Just an old key in her hand and the memory of how she built it. She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She turned the crank, and the vault opened. The hallway was cool, quiet, and lit by the steady hum of overhead LED strips. They cast a flat white sheen over concrete walls and polished steel doors, each one labeled in block lettering with sector codes and access tiers. Grace Morgan walked alone, her boots nearly silent on the smooth floor. She wore a gray blouse tucked into dark slacks, her ID badge clipped neatly to her waist. It read, Support, Admin Ops in faded ink, the plastic scuffed from years of contact with door frames and keypads. Her long blonde hair was tied back into a simple knot. She didn't draw attention. She never had. The underground facility came to life in waves. Monitors clicked on inside control nodes. Terminals powered up with layered login sounds and procedural chimes. Over the intercom, a voice began listing readiness protocols for the pre-drill phase. Operators in navy blue uniforms filed into position around touchscreens, their lanyards striped red or blue depending on clearance. Security teams moved in pairs, each wearing a sidearm and a biometric wrist scanner. Near the elevator bay, officers exchanged clipped greetings, trading updates on the morning's drill cycle. The vault sector would go active by 0800. Grace passed them unnoticed. She didn't stop to greet anyone. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm, the top sheet already filled with notes. Her section was not included on the day's rotation, but she walked the route anyway, checking the manifest displays by habit. She turned left, down Corridor 2, and paused near a frosted glass panel mounted beside the archive gate. The paper roster inside its steel frame listed terminal lockouts, technician names, and vault timestamps. Grace reached up to adjust the printout, carefully folding the new schedule into place along the top corner. She was halfway through when a voice called out behind her. "Hey, that one's for command only." She turned her head slowly. A security officer, tall and impatient, stood beside a nearby checkpoint. He didn't recognize her. That much was clear. Grace lowered her hand and nodded once. "I'm just updating the manifest." The officer stepped forward, glancing at her badge without bothering to hide his disinterest. "Command inputs only," he repeated. "That includes vault-side rotations. Support staff's down by logistics." Behind him, a younger technician chuckled. "You sure she's not here to audit the coffee filter inventory?" Another added, "Maybe she's just collecting clipboards. I hear it's a lost art." Grace said nothing. She let the clipboard rest at her side and stepped back from the panel. The officer didn't thank her or look twice. He simply turned back to his post, already speaking into his earpiece. The others followed his lead, returning to their own chatter. As she walked away, the overhead lights cast long shadows along the floor. Grace's fingers brushed the edge of the manifest, smoothing the page she hadn't been allowed to finish pinning. Her face was calm, composed, but her grip on the clipboard had tightened ever so slightly. She made her way toward a side corridor, one not used by most command personnel. It led past a row of structural beams installed when the facility was first reinforced. She stopped beside one. The metal was older than the rest of the hallway, painted once, but now dulled to gunmetal gray. Grace reached out and placed her palm against it. The surface was cool and rough. For a moment, she stood there without moving, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Then she withdrew her hand, checked her clipboard, and continued down the hall. Farther inside the main operations room, screens displayed layered maps of drill zones, response paths, and vault backup grid lines. Officers ran through their command sequences with brisk, confident tones. The vault was just one of several structures being tested that day. But It held more than emergency storage. Inside was a classified network hub for communications fallback and emergency supply schematics. Its access protocols had shifted after the last cyber drill, though only a few even knew what the physical interlock sequence looked like. Grace knew. She had written part of the original emergency procedure 10 years earlier, when the facility had still used analog redundancy in its deepest tiers. That was before a contractor-led overhaul and restructuring effort labeled her work obsolete. Her department was absorbed, her clearance reduced. The new systems were faster, smarter, easier to delegate, but they had left behind the fail-safe layer, the manual override that no one had tested in years. Now she was the only one left who remembered it. The chatter in the briefing room escalated as more command teams arrived. A major in a neatly pressed uniform tapped at a monitor, frowning at a data lag. Another officer called out for coffee between checklist calls. Someone in the back waved a stylus in the air and joked, "Where's admin with the update sheet? I need someone to blame when this thing stalls." Grace stood just outside the doorway, unnoticed. She checked her own notes against the rolling display and turned away. There were no eyes on her. That was the point. By 0745, most of the operation had gathered in the vault side access wing. A countdown echoed through the speakers, marking 15 minutes to drill initiation. Techs adjusted headset frequencies. Engineers aligned their digital override boards. The air held a rhythm of rehearsed confidence. No one noticed the woman in the gray blouse walking slowly past the auxiliary terminal station. Her clipboard held loose in one hand. She paused briefly at the corner of the hallway, watching the lights flicker once along the vault's security door. A red badge officer stepped in front of her path, glanced at her without recognition, and walked on. Grace Morgan said nothing. She turned and retraced her steps toward the lower admin hall, her expression unchanged. The clipboard tucked against her hip was still marked with a route she hadn't been assigned. She adjusted her badge slightly and entered a small, unlit room just past the logistics annex. The hum of command grew louder behind her. Voices sharpened. Timers clicked forward. No one called her name. No one asked why she had come early, and no one remembered what she used to know. But she did. The lights flickered once, then again, followed by a low, grinding hum that rolled through the foundation like something deep and structural had shifted beneath them. For a moment, no one moved. Then a tremor ran through the floor, sharp enough to rattle tablet screens against metal surfaces and jolt coffee cups off their corners. Monitors flared bright red across Command Sector 2. An alert tone cut through the air, loud and high, repeating every half second. Grace Morgan was walking along the outer edge of the operations floor when the first siren tripped. Her clipboard jerked slightly in her hands, and she stopped, watching the faces around her change in unison. Calm gave way to confusion, then alarm. A screen on the west wall flashed a message she hadn't seen in years. Facility instability detected. Sector lockdown in progress. Officers snapped to motion. One barked for diagnostic protocols. Another fumbled with a biometric reader, his thumb trembling as he pressed it to the panel. A senior systems tech cursed and leaned over a console, trying to force a manual override into the sequence before the system sealed. The vault sector, just beyond the inner wall, dimmed as backup lights kicked in. Then everything shut down. Power blinked out in a full sweep from left to right, leaving only red emergency LEDs and the static glow of inert panels. Vault seals engaged. From the center of the floor, a commander shouted, "We lost all access to Sector 7. Confirm interlock status now. Run fallback." No response. Someone said, voice tight, "Primary and secondary systems are both dark." Biometric override. Rejected. Server refresh. No input. It's not responding. I think we're in a hard vault lock. A young officer near the vault wall checked the main panel. The screen pulsed red, each flicker slower than the last. Access denied, she read aloud. Legacy protocol engaged. Manual override only. That stopped the room for a beat. Then another voice. What the hell does that mean? Where's the legacy interface? No one answered. Across the room, Technicians scrambled to locate backup paths in the drill documentation, but none matched the vault's current failure state. The new command network had never tested against legacy mode lockout. The system had defaulted to cold storage defense mode, something no one had reviewed since before the last system overhaul. The vault wasn't just a file server. It held continuity software, encrypted communication routes, and access to emergency deployment procedures for every facility within 100.0 kilometers. If it stayed sealed, they couldn't coordinate disaster response or execute fail-safe evacuations. The vault wasn't just important, it was critical. Grace stepped forward. Her voice was low but clear. "There's a manual fallback," she said. "A physical interface. I can show you where." A few heads turned. Most didn't. The commander barely looked at her. "Who are you?" "Grace Morgan. Support staff. Admin ops. I used to be with systems before they transitioned to outside contracts." He waved her off. "This isn't paperwork. We need control access, not filing support." "I helped draft the original interlock documentation," she said, steady. "The vault still has a keyed interface. It was embedded after the second-generation failover bug. You won't find it on the main schematic." A security officer near the panel glanced at her and smirked. "What's she going to do, fill out the vault's timesheet?" Someone chuckled under their breath. Grace held her ground. "You need physical access through the side channel. The override ports are recessed, but it has to be engaged manually, from inside." The commander didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the digital engineering lead. "Run a scan on every terminal in Tier 1. Check for power bleed. Try to bounce a signal back through the drone relay." "Already trying," the tech said. "No signal return." Grace's fingers tightened slightly on her clipboard. She looked toward the main vault door. Red lights pulsed along the vertical seams, a warning signal that the internal temperature was rising due to airflow failure. If it passed the safe threshold, the inner containment chamber would heat lock. Anything inside equipment, servers, recovery files would be lost. She stepped closer to the terminal where a junior officer was hunched over a failed diagnostic. He was young, maybe mid-20s. The back of his uniform still creased from storage. His hands hovered uncertainly over a virtual keypad, unsure where to begin. Grace leaned in slightly. "You're trying to bypass from the wrong sequence. That panel's reading in legacy failsafe, not modern thread protocol. You need to isolate the last known live command, then drop to analog mirror mode." He glanced up at her, confused. She pointed gently. "Try subdirectory 12. It's not labeled in the current UI, but it's still on the server partition." He hesitated, then ignored her. His fingers resumed searching the wrong path. Behind them, another voice rose. "Sir, vault interior temp is climbing. We're 10 minutes from failsafe shutdown. After that, contents are unrecoverable." "Reset it," the commander snapped. "We can't." The vault lights pulsed again. Slower now, almost like a warning heartbeat. Someone ran across the floor with a power converter unit. Another shouted for satellite relay checks. None of it helped. The facility buzzed with high-level command, overlapping directives, and sharp radio calls. No one looked at the woman still standing at the edge of the crisis. Grace's clipboard had bent slightly where she'd been gripping it too hard. The plastic flexed under her hand. She let it fall to her side, her expression still calm, but her breath had shortened. She stepped back, returning to the edge of the floor. They didn't want her. Not yet. The room filled with command voices layered on top of failure tones. The new systems had been designed for speed and scalability, not endurance. The vault was old tech hardened, manual, physical. Grace knew where the crank panel was. She knew how the access sequence worked. And she knew exactly how long they had before the entire system locked for good. But she said nothing else. They weren't listening. Not yet. Grace walked calmly through the edge of the operations floor as voices sharpened behind her. Red lights pulsed in warning. The command center was a storm of noise and urgency, but she moved along the service corridor without looking back. No one followed. No one noticed. The outer sectors had thinned out. Most of the staff had crowded around failed terminals or had been dispatched to surface comm relays. There were still a few scrambling to route power through the diagnostics room, but they didn't see her. She stepped past them quietly and turned left down a narrow hallway with no signage, just a scratched metal door with a keypad and a flickering light overhead. Inside, the room was dim and still. The old systems bay hadn't been updated since the infrastructure upgrade nearly 8 years earlier. Dust clung to the edges of the floor. A power conduit ran low along one wall, humming faintly. Her desk sat in the corner, compact and unassuming. 2 chairs, 1 screen, a drawer that always stuck slightly at the top if you pulled too fast. Grace opened it slowly. Inside, beneath a folder of logistics summaries no one had asked for in months, lay a cloth-wrapped pouch the size of her palm. She lifted it out with both hands, brushing a layer of dust from the edge. The cloth was dark gray, its corners stitched by hand. She set it gently on the desk and unwrapped it. A small metal key, dull from years of handling, lay at the center. It was narrow and oddly shaped, designed not for a standard lock, but for a recessed port with 5 staggered grooves. It had been part of the first prototype override module for Vault Control A, issued only to the original engineering architects. There had been 6 made. Grace had never given hers back. She reached behind her ID badge, unclipping the plastic housing from the chain. Tucked behind it, folded nearly flat, was a second badge. The print had faded, and the laminate had yellowed around the edges, but the lettering was still clear. Systems Engineering, Vault Control A, Clearance Alpha 9. She held it in her hand for a moment, then set it down beside the key. On the shelf above her desk was a rolled schematic secured by an old rubber band. She took it down, unfurled it across the surface, and smoothed the creases with her palms. The paper was heavy stock, matte and marked with annotations in faded red ink. Some lines had been circled, others crossed out. A faint ring of coffee had stained the upper corner. She traced one of the paths with her fingertip, following the interlock sequence through the old containment bypass. Down past a section labeled Auxiliary Latch. Then, along the thin line marked Port Epsilon Manual Input Only. She had memorized it years ago. Her mind drifted back to that first cycle of revisions when Vault Control A had still been on a shared development floor. She remembered the long arguments about analog redundancy. Grace had insisted the system needed a manual bypass, something hardwired and unlinked to the network. The others had argued it was overkill. She'd run simulations anyway, drafted diagrams, presented her findings. The proposal had passed without much support. 2 months later, when the newer command team rotated in, they considered the interlock obsolete. Budget cuts restructured her department. Her title shifted from systems lead to admin support. The Vault interface remained installed, but was never listed on the updated schematics. She rolled the map again and slid it into her satchel. At the back of the room, behind a filing cabinet no one opened, was a narrow maintenance hatch. She stepped over a low pipe and reached for the handle. The metal creaked as it turned, the hinges stiff from disuse. The passage beyond was narrow and lined with conduit. The light strips overhead flickered once, then steadied. She ducked slightly as she entered. The crawlway sloped downward, away from the buzz of the command floor. Her steps were quiet, steady. She passed between sections of conduit labeled in faded stencils SYSPWR, comms, AUXRLY. At a junction ahead, the air grew cooler. The insulation here had never been updated. This was part of the original build, layered into the foundation when the facility was first commissioned. Grace could feel the slight change in texture beneath her boots as the floor shifted from concrete to brushed steel. She stopped beside a sealed access panel. The slot for the manual key was covered with a dust cap. She removed it, revealing the 5-groove socket beneath. The metal was slightly corroded. She slid the key into place and felt the mechanism click softly into alignment. There was no sound from the vault. No indicator light. No broadcast signal. Only the certainty of memory. Grace looked once more at the schematic, now resting against her forearm. She adjusted the map until the lines matched the corridor's angle, then turned left at the next bend, passing a disused service locker and a junction marked VA Int FL1. The vault was less than 50 meters ahead. She didn't need confirmation. Every turn of the hallway was already burned into her memory. She paused near a small steel panel set into the wall beside a pressure seal. This would be the point of engagement. Inside was the junction where the fail-safe interlock could be reinitialized manually. She pulled the cloth from her satchel and wrapped it around the key again. Then she stood in silence, breathing evenly, eyes on the panel. They had told her years ago that no one would ever need the manual route, that systems like this would always run on automatic, that her attention to analog backups was inefficient. She hadn't argued. She hadn't demanded recognition, but she had not forgotten either. Grace pressed her hand to the panel, feeling the cool metal under her palm. The knowledge had never left her, and now, neither would the vault. The air in the lower corridor was stale and tinged with the faint scent of ozone. Grace moved carefully, her footsteps silent on the brushed steel grating beneath her boots. Overhead, the lights flickered intermittently, casting momentary shadows along the bulkhead. This stretch of the facility hadn't been used in years. Dust clung to the corners where floor met wall, and a single conduit cable, long since detached from its mounting bracket, hung slightly askew. The deeper she went, the quieter became, until the only sound left was the steady rhythm of her own breath. She followed the diagram from memory, turning once, then again, bypassing a rusted access ladder and ducking beneath a pipe labeled in faded red ink. Ahead was the wall panel unlabeled, flush with the surface, its edges worn smooth by time. She paused, letting her hand rest against the wall beside it, the metal cool under her palm. Then she reached for the cloth-wrapped key inside her satchel and carefully unrolled it. The manual access port sat behind a hinged plate, held shut by 2 thumb latches. Grace unfastened them one at a time, and the panel opened with a creak, revealing the analog interface beneath. It was a tight cluster of outdated mechanisms, a hand crank, 3 fuse ports, a recessed dial with pressure locks, and a single diagnostic light the size of a coin. The whole system was no larger than a backpack, tucked into the wall like an artifact. Grace inserted the key into the central switch. It turned with a soft click. Back in Command Sector 2, the air was thick with heat and frustration. The vault lights pulsed slower now, their intervals stretching as the system drifted closer to a full containment lock. The countdown had begun. 12 minutes until heat lock. According to the environmental substation, a captain was yelling across the room, demanding confirmation on whether any drone relay could be forced into the vault's uplink. It's not responding. One of the techs called out, "Command stream is dead. No telemetry. All node returns are flat. Pull the satellite window forward." "We did. No connection. We're blind inside." Another officer kicked a metal case out of his way and swore, "Then we're watching it die." No one noticed the green dot that had just appeared on a sub-channel diagnostic screen, buried deep in the legacy monitor stack. No one had time to look. Grace bent low, fitting the first fuse into its chamber. The unit accepted it with a subtle magnetic tug, locking into place. She turned to the second port, aligning the small notch at the top of the fuse with the inner groove. One twist, one press, and the seal engaged. She leaned in, studying the manual dial. Each increment was scored by hand. She had done it herself, years ago, etching calibration marks when the system still allowed local access. The sequence had to be timed precisely. She placed one hand on the crank and the other on the pressure valve. Her fingers rested against the cold metal for a moment. Then she began, with a steady rhythm. She turned the crank. One rotation, then another. The resistance was heavier than she remembered, but the motion was familiar. As she worked, she spoke under her breath. 5 clockwise. Pause. Engage valve. She pulled the pressure lever slowly. It resisted at first, then shifted with a soft pop as the circuit engaged. The diagnostic light blinked once, then again, steadying into a slow green pulse. Grace moved to the interlock panel, lifting the cover that concealed the tension rod. This part had no power input. It was entirely mechanical, designed to function in the absence of current. The rod extended by manual turn, inch by inch, pressing against the vault's primary locking assembly deep within the wall. She turned it 5 times, then 6. The floor beneath her hummed faintly. Inside the command room, someone shouted, "Vault environmental is stabilizing." "What did you just do?" A tech looked around, confused. "Nothing. It's not us." "Then where's it coming from?" "Back in the crawl space." Grace pressed both palms against the panel to feel the vibration. The mechanical relay had engaged. A channel was opening. She reached for the last fuse, smaller than the others, wrapped in a strip of cloth. It had once been marked with a red tag, now faded to pale pink. She placed it gently into the override slot, rotated the key once more, and stepped back. The green light flickered, then held. Grace looked at the mechanism for a moment longer. There was no dramatic sound, no broadcast message, just the quiet, steady thrum of gears moving deep within the wall and the faintest hiss of pressure equalizing. She waited, eyes focused on the light, counting seconds in her head. 30 seconds, then 60. She didn't rush. This was the part that mattered. The crank stopped vibrating. The light blinked once, then shifted color. In the command center, a technician stared at a side monitor. "We just received a signal from inside the vault. Manual interlock handshake. Legacy path." The commander turned. "That's not possible." "It's confirmed." "Who triggered it?" "I don't know. There's no command log." "Find out. Right now." Back in the tunnel. Grace turned the final lock. She removed the key, wrapped it again in cloth, and returned it to her satchel. She wiped a small trace of dust from her fingers and looked once more at the open panel before sealing it shut. The seal locked with a muted click. She stood, adjusted her satchel strap, and began walking toward the vault junction. Her steps were unhurried, her breath steady. She hadn't guessed how to do any of this. She didn't need to improvise. She had designed it. They were still guessing. She was already opening the door. The command center was losing structure by the second. Power remained unstable in the vault quadrant, and the overhead systems board showed red across almost every channel. Operators leaned over terminals, rerouting power sequences and checking node synchronizations. The digital override had failed twice. Heatlock protocols were now under 5 minutes away. A senior officer tapped furiously at a touchscreen that wasn't responding. Another called out system timestamps, voice clipped with frustration. "Nothing's accepting input," he said. "It's dead." The vault doors loomed at the far end of the operations floor. Lights above them pulsed red, the rhythm slow and ominous. Status monitors to the side displayed lines of errors. One of them read, "Override path disengaged." Another flashed, "Terminal lockout imminent." Then everything paused. It began with a flicker. One diagnostic screen, forgotten and unused in recent cycles, blinked to life. It had no operator logged in. No one had touched it. A junior technician standing nearby blinked at the sudden glow and stepped closer. "Wait," he said. "That's Vault Channel 5. That's not on the main rotation." Another screen came online beside it, this one flashing a message that didn't come from any current command path. "Legacy protocol accepted. Interlock engaged." More consoles lit up in sequence. The pulse of red lights over the vault door stopped, then turned amber, then green. A low mechanical hum rolled through the wall like a breath drawn inward. The vault door began to move. No one spoke. All eyes turned toward the sound. A long hiss of pressurized air escaped into the hallway. The door separated along its central seam and slid slowly outward, revealing a corridor lined in reinforced steel and pale blue light. The backup archive systems beyond it began cycling on, one by one, the hum of fans and reboot tones rising like a forgotten choir. A technician stepped back from his screen and whispered, "It's open." The commander turned from his console, disbelief written across his face. "That's not possible." The technician stared at the monitor. It's real. I have data flow from inside the vault. Communication software just came online. Backup routing is clean. The failover server is pinging. Sir, we're live. Another officer rushed toward the vault threshold, stopping just short of crossing inside. No firewalls, no security errors, no contamination triggers. It's clean. The lights steadied overhead. One of the engineers looked around. Who ran the override? There was no answer. No one at the consoles had access. No keycards had registered. No system trace showed any administrator activity. Then a voice called from the back of the room, near the corridor that led toward the maintenance levels. Sir, you need to see this. The commander stepped past the terminals and into the hallway. A few others followed. The corridor narrowed as it turned toward a sealed junction just outside the vault. The air was colder here, still touched by the pressurized chill of the secure systems beyond. Grace stood in front of the panel, her sleeves rolled to her forearms, one hand still resting lightly against the edge of the wall. The metal key was in her hand, wrapped again in the cloth she had carried for years. She wasn't smiling. Her face was calm, her stance composed. She didn't speak. The officer closest to the vault stared at her. That's Grace Morgan. Someone else said, she's admin, logistics. No, she used to be systems, vault control A. She built the fallback layers when this place was commissioned. The commander stepped closer, eyes narrowing. You're the one who installed the interlock. Grace met his gaze and nodded once. I drafted the override spec. She said, before the update contracts, before the network transitioned, the manual interface was left in place for redundancy. No one logged it after restructure. There was a long silence. The only sound was the quiet cycling of the archive servers rebooting behind the vault walls. How did you get past the gate? Someone asked. I never needed to, Grace said. I still had the original schematic. The path hasn't changed. The commander looked at her for a moment, saying nothing. Then he turned toward the vault interior. Lights stretched deep into the archive chamber. The glow spilled out onto the floor beside Grace, casting a pale band across the wall. I didn't know your name, he admitted. Grace didn't move. You weren't supposed to. I was reassigned. He looked back at her. Slower this time. You just saved the entire command network, he said. I know, she replied. The cloth in her hand shifted slightly as she wrapped the key once more. A technician behind the commander shook his head, still staring at the readout. I don't know how she did that, he muttered. The officer beside him said, because we were looking in the wrong place. A new log entry appeared on the master console screen. System online interlock resolved source legacy. Morgan. The commander read it and then stepped aside, allowing Grace to walk past. She moved without urgency, the same quiet posture she'd had that morning when no one had listened. She did not look back. They had mocked her. Then they forgot her. But when every other safeguard failed, she was the one the system still remembered. By the time the lights steadied across the vault sector, most of the facility had returned to normal rhythms. Screens no longer blinked red. Systems stabilized. The ambient hum of air circulation resumed, soft and even. In the command center, voices fell to a quiet murmur as terminal alerts turned green one by one. Emergency protocols were shelved. No formal announcement was made. In a back corner near systems logging, a junior technician updated the facility's override ledger. He paused before writing her name, checked the source metadata again, then slowly printed each letter with care. Grace Morgan. The entry sat alone under the legacy access category. He didn't say anything. He just underlined the name once, then moved on to the next log. Down the hall. Someone quietly replaced the ID card clipped to her drawer. It now carried a dual-striped clearance bar, legacy systems and active operations. No one handed it to her. It simply appeared on her desk later that afternoon, set beside a fresh printout of her original schematic. The page had been folded neatly, the edges crisp, as if someone had taken time to preserve the shape of it. Grace didn't react when she saw it. She just reached for the schematic, ran her fingers along the notes she had written years ago, then folded it once more and placed it gently in her satchel. Later that day, She walked alone through one of the auxiliary corridors, her boots soft against the tile. The lighting was dim here, the air cooler than most sections. She preferred it that way. It was quiet, and the silence left room to think. As she rounded a corner, she nearly passed one of the officers who had laughed earlier young, clean-cut, still holding a datapad he didn't seem to be reading. He stopped when he saw her. He began, then hesitated. I wanted to say something. Grace waited, her expression neutral. I didn't know who you were, he said. I didn't understand what you were trying to do. She nodded once. It's fine. He shifted, unsure. I mean, it's not... I should have listened. Her reply was calm, without judgment. Then remember it next time. She walked past him without slowing. Outside the vault, things were quieter than before. The command center no longer crowded the entrance. There were no guards, no ceremony. The door stood open now, its lights soft, the air inside tempered and even. Most had moved on to other assignments. Just the vault was secure again. Systems restored, data flowing. But something in the atmosphere had changed. Valerie, the public relations officer, caught up to Grace near the inner rim of the command sector. Her tone was carefully casual, the way it always was around people who made headlines without trying. If you ever want to talk on record, she said, voice smooth, we could set something up, just to document what you did. Highlight the story. Grace looked at her evenly. You already did, she replied. Valerie faltered for a second, then gave a short nod and stepped aside. Farther back, near the logistics bay, the commander stood watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't call her name. But as Grace passed through the space where the vault lights touched the floor, he gave a single nod, nothing more. She returned the gesture with a glance, then kept walking. Near the far wall, a private snapped a photo, not for the media archive, not for any broadcast, just a quiet image stored on a tablet, time-stamped and tagged for internal records. Grace didn't pose. She wasn't in focus. The light caught her only partially, the angle soft, the background more visible than her face, but the photo was logged anyway. Above the console, the screen still displayed the final recovery entry. System status stable override origin legacy, charge. Morgan. Grace paused once at the threshold of the vault. The air smelled faintly of steel and cool wiring. She looked inside, taking in the glow of rebooted terminals and the gentle sound of fans turning. It had been nearly a decade since she'd last stood here. She didn't need to enter. Her part was done. With quiet steps, she turned away and walked back down the corridor. No one clapped, no one followed. But this time, they saw her go, and they remembered. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one no one notices. Grace Morgan was never meant to stand at the center of command. She was overlooked, dismissed, and pushed to the edge of the system she once helped build. But when everything failed, it was her knowledge, her preparation, and her quiet resolve that held the line. She did not argue. She did not demand attention. She simply acted, and through that action, reminded everyone what real authority looks like. This is a story about quiet strength, the kind that waits patiently and rises when the moment calls. If you have ever been underestimated, unseen, or told your voice did not belong, let this story remind you that silence does not mean weakness. Leave a comment if this moved you, and follow for more stories that honor the power of quiet, capable women who never needed a spotlight to make history.